I'd like to introduce myself and thank everyone for coming. My name is Nick Aziz. I am the Community Engagement Curator here at the New Orleans Museum of Art. We have a great program in store for you all today. I'd like to first, before moving forward, for those who are in New Orleans, I'd just like to acknowledge the land that we are on. Prior to colonization, New Orleans was known as Bobuncha, meaning it's a Choctaw word meaning land of many tongues. And I just wanted to acknowledge that before we get started. For this program is in conjunction with the Mending the Sky Exhibition. For those who don't know, this exhibition is on view here at the New Orleans Museum of Art until January 31st. So there's still some time to check out the exhibition. Currently, we are open Thursdays through Sundays, 10 to 6 p.m. So for those who are interested in checking out the exhibition before it comes down, I highly recommend it. So this program that we have in store tonight is a part of our NOMA Reset series. This is a series that we started during COVID to focus on programs that involve creativity, reflection, mindfulness. So as you'll see, this program is very much in line with that. And thank you all once again for coming. Just some Zoom housekeeping before we get started. You all are muted. There will be a question and answer period at the end, about 10-15 minute period. You can use the chat function. We'll be monitoring the chat during the presentation. So if you do have questions, you can put them in the chat. We can go back to those at the end during the Q&A. And I believe that's the majority of everything. And so I'd just like to introduce our presenter for the evening. Mirto Daskaloudi is an astrologer, herbalist, and educator who offers learning experiences, which are a combination of her studies of plant medicine, sexual healing, astrology, and ritual. She connects students predominantly through medicines and spiritual teachings from her Mediterranean lineages. Ancient Greek and Jewish magic guide her practice. She is queer, pro-sex worker, pro-indigenous and Black liberation and leadership, pro-self-reliance and autonomy, pro-earth regeneration, and pro-reclamation of ancestral practices. And I'll let Mirto take it away.
Thank you so much, Nick. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you everybody for coming out tonight. So I'm really excited to share what I have planned for you tonight, because it's a little bit different than what I normally teach. So throughout the year, I'm teaching classes on astrology, mostly teaching folks, the foundations of astrology. And it's something I've been studying for many, many years. My beautiful mother, who's here, shout out Mom, thank you for giving me that astrology book when I was 10, because it truly, propelled me on this path. I became obsessed with astrology. And I find it is such a helpful tool as a human being trying to navigate this very complex and oftentimes erupting with challenges and difficulties, oftentimes erupting with joys and blessings. It just has been a really helpful map for me in understanding myself, as well as understanding what is going on around me, and really looking at cycles and patterns in within generations, within within the year, within the season. There are so many. I love astrology because of how kind of multifaceted and layered it can be in practice. And so today I just wanted to share a bit about the rich history of astrology that we often, that is predominantly used today in the West, and it's called, tropical astrology. There's a lot of different astrological systems, because although the astrology that I'll be talking about tonight, comes from the Mediterranean, people understood the system of the stars and had their own language and stories for it all over the world. So, you know, this is particular to my lineage, but it's definitely worth researching, you know, wherever you come from, because we all kind of taught and influenced each other, and all there's a collective consciousness that you can kind of see within astrology, where you're like, well, these were things that maybe people in this part of the world were discovering at this time, but people in another part of the world may have been discovering a similar thing, understanding archetypes and energies through the stars. So I also want to give a, before I start, a land acknowledgement where I am. I'm on Mohican territory in upstate New York. So yeah, just wanted to say that. And yeah, I'm gonna share my screen so we can get into this slideshow I prepared for y'all. Can everybody see this? Yeah, cool. Okay, so I mean, I really love this title of the exhibit. Whoever created, the artist, this is a beautiful kind of sentiment, mending the sky. You know, to me, this is a huge part of why I practice astrology as well as herbalism. You know, part of my practice is super rooted in embodiment here on earth and being physically connected with the plants and my body. But the astrological part of my studies and my practice connect me with understanding the language of the sky. And I think for a long time, human beings have forgotten their relationship to the sky because we're so focused on, you know, what's happening down here on earth and making money and, you know, doing all this shit that, excuse me, that stuff that we have to do to survive under the current, you know, power structures. And I think oftentimes also people want to deny that the planets have any pull on us. And I think that's, you know, it's very egocentric, and it's very telling of kind of some human consciousness that has been dominating for a while, which is that, you know, I'm superior, nothing can affect me, yada, yada, yada. But yeah, I mean, it's just the same, like a plant is going to be affected by the sun or the rain. The planets are showering energies. They are made out of really intense, you know, compounds of energy forces. Some are fiery and hot, some are, you know, cold and watery, and they affect us as they move in the sky. So it's a helpful way to kind of understand what is going on, and yeah, kind of heal our relationship as like as animals, as humans, as we're not just like, we're here on earth, but we're also connected to the sky, and kind of just this sentiment of as above, so below, you know, like there are mirrors always everywhere all the time. So okay, getting into a little, you might want to get your notebooks out for this part, you know. There's a lot to cover. So the origins of tropical astrology are from Mesopotamia. The Sumerian civilization really kind of, that's where we started to see, at least this is the documentation that we have, you know. The Sumerians were really cool because they were quite goddess worshiping, and they only worshiped the sun, the moon, and Venus. Boom, simple, you know. And the names they had for those planetary bodies, the moon is Nana, the sun is Utu, and Venus is Inanna, who many of you may be familiar with Inanna, as she also relates to the myth of Lilith. Lilith is Inanna's handmaiden. That's a story for another time. Maybe I'll have time to tell it later. But the Sumerians were definitely more goddess worshiping. And then in the same kind of area, there were the Assyrian and Babylonians, and they kind of were a bit more patriarchal, and they had more fiery sun worshiping energy, and particularly this god named Marduk, who in the stories, he wants Inanna to be his bride, and he kind of takes over. And so we see the Babylonian period lasting quite a long time in this area, and also really spearheading the 12 sign wheel that we use today. And the Babylonians discovered more planets, and they actually had a very complex understanding of the planets. And I have this in my notes somewhere else. I need to check on the date of this, but you know, they said that I forget the date. It was probably like 100 years ago or so, maybe more, that this white guy discovered the planet Pluto, and that this was the first time that Pluto had been discovered. It was probably longer ago than that. I'm totally spacing. I'm sorry. But it was actually proven and shown that the Babylonians had understanding that Pluto existed. So I think that's pretty cool. And I really wonder, how did these ancient civilizations understand and learn the language and the mathematics of the movements of the sky? Part of me thinks that a lot of it was channeled in a very spiritual way. Part of me thinks maybe it was aliens that came and taught them, who knows? But with no telescope, they're really just looking with their bare eyes and studying in a way that I don't think we can comprehend in this, day and age. So this 12 sign system is then adopted by kind of everybody in that Mediterranean, Levantian area, the Greeks, the Jews, the Arabs of that area. Everybody kind of adopted this, but it was the Egyptians. Everybody is like, well, I think that people have a conception that the 12 sign system is specifically coming from ancient Egypt, but the Egyptians had a really complex and different their own system of astrology that used a different decan system that had 36 stars. So really the way that ancient Egyptians were tracking the year was within a 36 star system. And it's much more complicated, and I personally don't know how to read that, but I think it's really so cool. And I've studied it a little bit. Oopsie, sorry. And it's, definitely more complex. But, because everybody was traveling and connecting, and also because the Greeks came into Egypt and really spent a long time there, they were using the 12 sign system. And I don't really know everything that was said between everyone. I know they were learning a lot from each other, but the 12 sign system just felt, I guess, more simple in some ways, and became the popular thing, and then the Romans learned that from the Greeks. And now we have this tropical astrology, and everyone wants to know what their sign is, But what's really interesting about, astrology back in these days is that it was more so used for predictions, for really like what is going to happen, and kind of in a medical sense of like, when is a healthy time to do certain things? Because astrology was also very much understood in the medical sense of how it interacts with the body. Astrology is not just talking about energies, but it's literally relates to organs in our bodies. So it was definitely used for those purposes, really for a lot of marriages, births. I was reading a very interesting article about this ancient Persian Jewish astrologer. His name is Masha Allah, and he was kind of hired to be the astrologer for the founding of Baghdad. And in the article, they were talking about how, you know, Baghdad ended up going through a lot of difficulties, and maybe this Persian Jew didn't necessarily give them the best advice because his people were facing persecution. And it was said that the chart that he drew up for them was on Shabbat, which is our day of rest. So I think it's so interesting how, you know, whole cities and civilizations were founded on the advice of astrologers, you know, and how that could either go really well for you or really wrong for you. And also, you know, that I think I can look at a chart of the day today, or I can look at anyone's birth chart, and there's always going to be good things and bad things. So I think it's hard to really say, I don't know how I would help someone found a whole city necessarily, but yeah. And then there's this really cool word that I learned, and maybe my mom can help me pronounce it because I'll probably say it terribly, katasterismos. So this is like a Greek word of meaning to set something into the sky with a mythology, but like specifically a transformational mythology, a transformational story. And that's what I really love about astrology, and I get really into when I give people readings and when I teach classes, is that it's so much about these stories, you know, these really ancient myths that give us an amazing perception and way to articulate what we are going through, maybe in our daily lives or just as human beings, and we can relate to these gods and goddesses and nymphs and maenads and whomever. So yeah. So here's the map, a very old map. And I just love how, you know, this whole like Crossroads area, you know, it truly is just like this intersection. And there's this really cool ancient goddess from this area, Ekati, who is the goddess of the three-way crossroads. And you kind of really see there's almost a three-way intersection going on here. So, you know, I was talking about the Assyrians, the Babylonians, and then we'll also be talking about, and the Greece is over here, Egypt obviously is here. And so, you know, there was a lot of travel and a lot of exchange. This is an ancient Egyptian astrological map. And I believe this one is showing the 36 decanic system. So it's a bit more complex. Very beautiful. This is an ancient Islamic map of the stars, astrological map. So beautiful. So there are a lot of famous astrologers of old, and I just wanted to talk about a few that you hear about Ptolemy a lot, and these other guys you maybe have never heard of them. They're mostly all Babylonian. I really couldn't find, you know, sadly the Babylonians destroyed a lot of Sumerian history, and so I really couldn't find much about who was, you know, keeping the information of those civilizations. But all of these guys, obviously we're seeing it's through men, even way back. Patriarchy has been doing its thing for a long time. So it was all men that I can find, you know, that were the keepers of this knowledge. And specifically the Babylonian men, they're called the priests of Bel Marduk. And, you know, Marduk is that fire god that I was talking about. And, you know, there's information about them, you know, sometimes they're in Greece, sometimes they're in Egypt. They definitely were traveling around. But they're Kidinu, Berosus, and Sudines, and they all sort of, Sudines was Berossus's teacher, so they all predecess each other. And then Ptolemy is possibly Greek, possibly Egyptian descent. People don't really know, but he died in Alexandria and he was mostly based in Alexandria. And his writings on astrology are some of the best documented of this time and of the ancient world and kind of what was going on there. And he was also a mathematician. And that's the thing about astrology that, you know, I don't do any of now. Like, I don't do any of the mathematics that astrologers back in the day were doing to calculate these really intricate passings of planets. Like, I just put someone's birth time into the computer and I can, you know, pull up their chart. So yeah, what's really interesting, and maybe you've heard the Chaldean Oracles. This is like, or the Chaldean area. And it was actually, yeah, like a whole civilization, and a whole, like, it was its own country for a while. And they were, that's where a lot of the people who held the astrological knowledge came from at this time. And I was researching Chaldean, and then I stumbled across this whole thing about Chaldean people in the United States facing deportation, and that they're a small ethno group of Iraqis who are Christian. The Chaldeans, it's like a Christian thing now, but they're facing deportation from ICE. So it's something to look into, because fuck ICE and fuck people being deported right now. And yeah, I just had never even heard of this ethnic group. So I think it was, yeah, something to look into. This is an ancient Hebrew map of the stars, an ancient Jewish map of the stars. So it's a lot of the 12 sign system. You can see Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra with the scales, Scorpio. I'm not sure who's in the middle here. I'm curious about who this is. Okay, so I wanted to introduce the concept of ages. So maybe, I'm sure everybody knows the song Age of Aquarius and like the whole thing about like, oh, like we're entering the age of Aquarius. Like that's been a thing for a while. And astrologers really haven't known exactly when we will have entered the age of Aquarius. I'm pretty positive now we have. I mean, we've just gone through, we're in some very major Aquarius transits, and we're getting on in like the 2000s that I think, you know, we're in it. But ages last a very long time. It's between like 2000 to like 2,300 year periods of time. And this is when one sign will be basically ruling the vernal equinox point of the earth for a very long time. So while we are experiencing a lot of movements every day and every year within the planets, there are also these this very long-term transit that humans go through that lasts, like I said, you know, over 2,000 years. And we can see, it's so interesting how like humanity has really embodied these archetypes throughout time. So if we rewind about, you know, 8,000 years or so, the age of Taurus. So in the Neolithic period of time, 4,200 to 2,300 BCE, this is when goddess worshipping cultures ruled the earth, you know, or not even ruled, but existed. Communities, goddess worshiping communities were thriving. And this is when the sign Taurus was ruling the vernal equinox, you know, ruling for that long period of time. And this is when we saw a lot of the holy bull being worshipped throughout the world. Hathor in Egypt, and well, there was like the story of Ptah, but then it becomes Apis, who is this sacred cow. Europa in Crete, El in is like a Semitic god, cow god. Aphrodite is often depicted as a cow, and the Krishnas, you know. So there's a lot of this sacred cow, divine, like earthy, sweet, slow moving, goddess worshiping, matriarchal energy. I want to go back to this time personally, okay? I feel like I have nostalgia for this time in the world. And then the next age moves in, and who do we move into but little old Aries, who always has to come in with a little bit of a, you know, a little bit of a fight. You know, there's some confrontation with the energy of Aries. Aries is the warrior archetype, you know, and Aries is also the spring, is the rebirth energy, so it can be very young energy. And this is when, you know, the time of the Old Testament. And in the story, Moses goes to the mountaintop and he sees like the burning bush, and it's like a sign from God, and he like literally blows the horn of a ram, like Aries, to tell everybody we're no longer worshiping the golden calves, and now we have to sacrifice the lamb. And boom, we've moved into more of a solar, masculine, really, this is when patriarchy starts to rise in civilizations across the world. And we see, you know, Amen-Ra, Pallas Athena. Actually, was just talking about her with a dear friend today, and she actually was quite a vessel for the patriarchy in some ways. You know, she really stood by the men, and she represented this very mental kind of very intellectual, and I mean, she's a badass. I love Athena, but she was kind of very hanging with the boys. She was celibate though. She didn't want to be seen as being a sexual woman. Anyway, Mithra is a Persian god. So there are many, right? There are many gods and goddesses that were starting to, you know, gain power. And what does it mean when these gods or goddesses gain power? Probably that human beings that emulated those gods and goddesses were gaining power, right? And so I think during this time, the goddess worshiping cultures really were destroyed. I mean, that Aries energy came in with such a burning fire to kind of be seen and be, you know, the golden child in a lot of ways. Aries energy wants to be very special and appreciated. But then there's this destructive force of Aries that doesn't matter, it doesn't care about what's in its way, you know. And there's also just like a lot of setting up a new way of being, you know. So this is during the age of Aries. And then the next age, which we just ended, you know, it's kind of crazy that we happen to live in between the turning of not only a century, but the turning of the ages, which really doesn't happen often since, right, we're dealing with 2,000 years. So the age of Pisces, Christ consciousness is born, the Messiah arrives, right? And Pisces is the sign of the fish. Pisces rules the feet, you know, and I mean, Christianity literally is using the fish symbol of Pisces, and they try to say now that they're not connected, but they're totally connected. I think it seems like most of these ancient religions in Islam, in Judaism, in Christianity, they were using astrology to just as a map to figure out what to do and to predict things and to understand themselves. So yeah, the age of Pisces, it does bring, you know, Christ consciousness at its core is beautiful. It's all about, you know, universal love. And it is more of like I guess a feminine energy. It is also, Pisces is all about sacrifice, right? Jesus is literally the ultimate martyr. Pisces definitely deals with martyrdom archetypally. But unfortunately, even though we, you know, some of these things that this time period bring, I think is good. You know, Pisces is a very spiritual sign. It's a very old sign. You know, it can bring some old wisdom that maybe we needed after this energy of Aries, maybe bringing in some very chaotic, young, intense energy that burns some things away. Maybe we need some restoration of Pisces, you know, but like what happened? Why did Christianity then kind of, in a lot of ways, turn into a harmful entity? And I mean, I was raised Greek Orthodox and I have beautiful memories and I love the Greek Orthodox Church and I appreciate Christianity. So like no shade, anybody who's in here who is Christian practicing, I'm not saying that it is a bad religion, but we did see a lot of bad things happen because of it. And, you know, why is that? The thing that I think the Age of Aries did, because it repressed the goddess culture at its core really is rooted in understanding the dark moon goddesses, the primordial womb that we come from, understanding the shadows and parts of life and death that oftentimes in today's world people are afraid of, you know, and it's a part of the psyche that I think has been repressed for a long time. And so we saw with the Age of Aries that it was also, Aries rules the brain. Aries are very, very smart people, you know, it's a lot about intellect. So the Age of Aries brought a lot of like pressure to be very intellectual in a way and repress these more emotional, internal kind of, you know, dark moon qualities. So when we got to the Age of Pisces, there was already so much repression happening in the psyche of humans that Christ consciousness, I feel like, could not, you know, fully touch the hearts of so many people because they were not really doing this transformational work and understanding the parts of themselves that they feared. So they project that fear onto others. And the dark moon is also important in understanding kind of, I feel, in understanding the root of like anti-blackness and just fear of women, fear of anybody kind of who is different than this typical Aries power, you know, thing. But the dark moon also, like I'm saying, when it became repressed, the goddesses who represented the dark moon and that part of our psyche became repressed, darkness became feared. This also was a time when darkness in the world, when the eclipses happened and stuff, it was more of a feared thing. And so it sort of, I feel like, has snowballed and spiraled into a monster where people are operating from a place of having a lot of fears of darkness, whether that shows up in people with dark skin, whether that shows up in, you know, women who are appearing to be too sexual, and that's dark, you know, and that's lascivious and bad, or people who want to just go deep and talk about the things that are, you know, uncomfortable, often are going to be exiled from spaces because of that. So yeah, now we've moved out of the age of Pisces finally, and now we're in the age of Aquarius. So what is this age all about? Aquarius is an air sign. And so whenever we're dealing with the air element, we're dealing with a lot of communication, a lot of intellect, a lot of words, you know. It's all about information. And Aquarius is specifically the sign of technology, of the future, of innovation, of really creating a new world, you know, because Aquarius comes after the sign of Capricorn, and Capricorn is all about traditions and kind of the old world. So Aquarius is like really bringing in the new world. So we can definitely see, right, that we're dealing with some of that in this day and age, because we obviously are heavily relying on a lot of technology. We're definitely in a point in history where we need to let go of a lot of old traditions that are harmful. And it's really a time where we can use science, technology, and spirituality, because Aquarius is very open-minded and likes to incorporate all things, you know. Here's some pretty pictures. This is Hathor over here, the Egyptian goddess of love and fertility. This is Apis, also Egyptian. And this is Asteria, Greek goddess of the fallen stars, and the Oneromancy, which is like the dream interpreting. This is actually Ptolemy's wheel, his chart. So is this a Greek chart? But it is kind of similar, right, to the Jewish one, where there's like the 4 creatures and the 1 person. I need to find out who this is. Okay. So a little forecast. We don't have a lot of time left, so I want to make sure there's time for questions. I've been talking a lot, but a little bit about the forecast. So we already had some of the eclipses. I mean, I guess that was in 2020. So I'll just say in June, we're going to have another cycle of eclipses, and it's going to be a full moon eclipse in Sagittarius and a new moon eclipse in Gemini. So the eclipses are important to pay attention to, because although they only happen in those signs twice a year, they really govern throughout our whole year, like what we're processing within our shadows, you know, because the eclipses, it's literally when the sun or the moon is completely covered, right? And so it's complete darkness. So that means we have to go into that space in ourselves. So within the signs of Sagittarius and Gemini, what we're really processing on a subconscious kind of shadowy level in ourselves has a lot to do with our relationship to, you know, our relationship to information, which is Gemini, our relationship to literally how we gather information, how we speak information, our intellectual relationships may change, you know, our interests may change, what we want to study. And Sagittarius, who is the opposite sign of Gemini, who, you know, Gemini is all about having, you know, looking at everything with a microscope, or with like like a microscope, and being like, wow, like look at all the details. And then Gemini's sister sign, Sagittarius, is like, let's look at the big picture. I want to connect with the globe, with the world. I want to understand the cosmologies and the stories, you know, the myths. This is Sagittarius. So we're kind of, I really feel that people are needing to come into a place of understanding each other from both of these perspectives more, you know, like the Sagittarius way of like understanding someone's cultural cosmologies and stories, and kind of the themes within their experience. And then Gemini is really understanding the information, like really studying that shit, not just looking at one article and now you are, you know, a genius. So yeah, there's definitely a lot being processed there, especially if you are a Sagittarius or a Gemini. If you have any major planets in those signs, you know, you're definitely going to be going through some deep learning and growing this year. We also have the retrogrades, Mercury retrograde. Everybody probably knows about Mercury retrograde to some, you know, to some way. And first of all, I just want to say, please don't fear Mercury retrograde. It is really a time of, again, a time of learning, because who is Mercury or Hermes, you know? He was so dearly worshipped throughout Greece and Egypt. In Egypt, you more so hear about him as Hermes Trismegistus, three, because he is very much all-seeing, all-knowing. He's constantly traversing the worlds between the underworld and the upper world, and is the messenger, you know. So when Mercury goes retrograde, our messenger, our intellect, our communication goes into a time of kind of anything, like all the words that start with a re, right? Like reset, reprogram, regenerate, you know, you reflect, okay? So it's definitely a time to reflect and kind of go into a deep learning process with whatever sign it's in and where it's falling in your chart. So some of the ones coming up, we have one coming up very soon next week, January 30th through February 21st, Mercury retrograde in Aquarius. So they're all going to be in the air signs this year, which also means more learning about how we, you know, process things mentally. Like there's just so much emphasis this year on communication, which also makes sense being that we're in a pandemic, being that we have to communicate differently and innovate communication differently. So, you know, things definitely can get slowed down with retrogrades. And I feel that with this retrograde coming up in Aquarius, on a collective level, there definitely may be some things about, I think vaccines, you know, because I think that it seems like it's been hard for our country here in the US to administer them in a good, timely way for everybody. And I think that this retrograde period is definitely going to show that a lot, and also force, you know, us to kind of innovate a new way of dealing with that. It also may be a pretty challenging retrograde for some, because it's going to be coinciding with the planets Saturn and Jupiter, and especially with Saturn usually brings some tough lessons, but it's also all about structure. So it's like lessons that have to do with how you're innovating and changing your structure for the future, for the better. The next one is going to be in May. This one will be in Gemini. So this is going to be coinciding with the eclipses. And so this one will be an extra shadowy retrograde period, I think. And Gemini can be very chatty. It can be like definitely a lot of new information coming in, new connections being made, but ultimately a invitation to really center in your own voice, you know, in your own clear understanding of what you're trying to say and who you are. And then the last retrograde happening in Libra. So this will be more so about our relationships in the fall. And, you know, exploring new communication within relationship. This summer, plan a date on this day, July 13th. Venus and Mars will be conjunct in Leo. And really, this will be a conjunction happening for a couple of weeks. So July is going to be a super romantic, sweet time if you want to, you know, do something fun with yourself or with others. But it's definitely some very sweet energy and very activating energy in terms of, like, if you are a creator or an artist or a musician or a dancer, like, this is a great time to showcase yourself. Oh God, I'm running out of time, but the last two things. So Saturn just moved into Aquarius and Jupiter just moved into Aquarius. So for this whole year, 2021, we are really being given opportunity by Jupiter to grow and create new structure, to change deeply, deeply, deeply all of the structures that we exist in. And because also there will be what's called a square happening between Saturn and Jupiter with Uranus in Taurus. Uranus brings great change and disruption and, you know, inspiration. And so pretty much all year we're dealing with a lot of these. And when we see a square in astrology, it means that those planets are really going to challenge each other. It may be some difficult times, but ultimately it's for a huge growth, a huge transformation. So again, Uranus sort of throwing thunderbolts at the structures of things. You know, we're going to be looking at that this year. So strap in. That's all I have to say. And here's beautiful goddess Asherah of the Levant, goddess of trees, goddess of fertility, motherhood, serpents and lions. And this Wednesday is the holiday Tu B'Shavat, which is the sacred day of trees for the Jewish people. And so we celebrate Asherah this Wednesday. So, you know, kiss a tree, hug a tree that day, put an offering out or whatever if you feel called to. And yeah, that's all I have. And I want to give some time for some questions. There's a lot of information to cover in a short amount of time. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, so once again, you all, you can ask questions. You should be able to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question, or you can put it in the chat. I'm happy to read questions as well. Yeah, we can open it up now for questions.
Yes, Kayla.
Hi.
Hey.
That was so amazing. Thank you so much for this beautiful offering, and thank y'all for organizing. This is, no pun intended, stellar. But I have a question. You opened with this idea of like being able to be in connection with the stars in a way that kind of like inverts the ego, right? Like makes something like connected to larger than ourselves. And I feel like in many conversations about astrology, people get into these like particularized spaces of like, well, I'm a Capricorn and so I'm blank, blank, blank. Do you have like thoughts on what that, I don't know, how that comes into conversation with those ideas, or like how to even like kind of push back against it?
Yeah, totally. That's a great question. Thank you, Efaristo, Michaela. And so I think in terms of pushing back against it, if you're having, you know, conversations with friends, just, I think offering space for the context to not just be obsessing about ourselves. Because as astrology moved west, and over here, you know, in Western Europe, and then here on this colonized land, the Western European thought was so much about psychoanalyzing and, you know, and then Freud and these thinkers, you know, became very popular. And so that kind of all infused into astrology. And, you know, now when I do readings for people, it really is like, I call it astrotherapy, because I'm not really sitting down giving people predictions. I personally don't feel comfortable. Like, I don't want to be giving really long-term predictions for people, but I do like it as a way for, you know, getting some language and understanding of ourself. And also, like, I really shy away now from, I think earlier when I started, I was like, oh, I'm this moon, so that means I'm just like this. And I would just be obsessed with how I was because of, you know, my sign or whatever. But now it's more so looking at the larger cycles. So I like to look at, you know, how I feel during the seasons, or how I also love the asteroid goddesses, you know, looking at the asteroids and the fixed stars in our sign, in our charts, that sort of give these bigger like themes of fate in our lives that I think are interesting to play into. But you know, focusing on the outer planets with people can be helpful, because the inner planets, Venus, Mars, Mercury, the sun, the moon, those are all about our personality. Yeah, you know, for the most part, that has a lot to do with the personality. But the outer planets, Saturn, Jupiter, Neptune, Uranus, Pluto. Okay, what am I doing in the collective? How am I engaging with, you know, my Saturn tribe, you know, the people in Saturn in Pisces, like everybody, what are we doing? Or, you know, thinking about Jupiter in your chart in terms of like, Jupiter is the belief system and the community that I feel drawn to, and that I feel I can open to, and that gives me opportunity, you know. So understanding that. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it's a big topic, definitely. And it's like, I hope that we can move more toward it being less just about ourselves individually, although I do think that can serve a great purpose. I don't think it needs to be the only way that we use it. And definitely it is more of a uniting tool. And I mean, I loved looking through the ages, because it really helped me understand just how just how much we are affected by the stars on such a like huge archetypal level, you know.
Yes, thank you so much. I love that perspective.
Yeah.
Appreciate you.
If we have one in the chat, someone asked, how did you become interested in your field, and how did you learn so much?
Well, I became interested because, like I said earlier, when I was like 10, my mom gave me this kid's astrology book. And she also always would just like ask me, like, oh, like, what signs are your friends? Like, my mom is super magical and knows a lot about tarot and astrology. So it was always just kind of like around a little bit. And then I just really was having a hard time in college and even in high school. Like, but I think when I went to college was when I got super obsessed, and I really didn't care much about school, but I just was always studying astrology. And I took some classes with a teacher in Vermont, Atmo Abram, who is really wonderful. And just, yeah, just a lot of like self-study, reading books, like reading stories, you know, online classes here and there. Yeah, thank you. Hey, Debbie.
Hi, Mirtula. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you. This is incredible. I'm not really sure if this is a question or an observation. So you made me think about something that I experienced when I was in Lefkada, this beautiful Greek island, and we drove up to this really high, this elevated like area where there was a village, and just before we entered the village, we stopped by this tiny remote church. There was no light, nothing, and I've never seen a sky like that ever in my life, and I don't get to experience, because I'm in New York City and buildings, this chaos, and whenever I go back and I think about that, like the sky, I get this weird, I don't know, I get goosebumps, and I feel something when it comes to remembering that visual. And you mentioned in the beginning how you really don't know how in ancient times how people were documenting and taking in this information and making sense out of the planets. And I was just thinking that I understand that technology gives us so much, but how much is it taking from us when we are completely disconnected from nature? I know you're closer to nature, but for us to actually get out into nature, sometimes it's also like kind of like an energetic battle of like trying to make it happen, you know? So
yeah, totally. I love that you brought up Lefkada, because that's where I go and study herbalism with my teacher. And you're right. I mean, when with no light pollution, the sky looks very different and looks probably more clear. And yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that's a beautiful just sharing and observation. And yeah.
does a lot of technology and when you're not being in nature kind of influence your work?
I guess it has influenced my work when I lived in honestly, I think for me, because I'm an herbalist, it does, but I know a lot of amazing astrologers that live in New York City and live in cities all over. So I think people do take, like you said, make that fight, make that time to like connect with nature on some level, because even if you can't see the stars, the planets are elemental. So even going to the park and hang out with the tree, you're hanging out with earth element, or you go to Rockaway, go to the ocean. Okay, now I'm with the water element, the sun, I'm with the fire element, But yeah, I think it can affect it for sure. So yeah, come visit sometime. I'm not too far.
I will. Thank you again for this.
Yeah, thank you.
Ευχαριστώ.
Ευχαριστώ πολύ.
We have two other questions. Any thoughts on tapping into the moon from an astrology perspective? And will this be a good year for Leos?
Okay. Tapping into the moon. So the moon in astrology, represents our inner self. So it's really our emotional body. And in the physical body, the moon represents our belly, chest and breasts and lymphatic. And if you are a womb carrier or somebody who menstruates, the moon obviously will affect that as well. So I think getting in touch with the moon is really getting in touch with your feelings. Something my mom told me to do years ago that really has helped also is just standing under the moon at least 10 minutes a night. And that really does help with your connection with the moon, which is your intuition, which is to trust and understand your feelings. So, find out what moon sign you have, and you could build an altar for the moon, do the moon gazing. You can get some like moonstone crystals or what have you. When I first started studying astrology, the moon was one of the primary elements or planets that I really began to understand, because I would check I would check every day, and I noticed, wow, the moon moves really fast. So I was paying attention to where the moon was every 2 days, because the moon changes signs every 2.5 days. And for me, as a moon in Cancer, I felt like I really was emulating whatever sign the moon was in, because my moon sign is ruled by the moon. That's really cool to get into just the moon, you know. And then for Leos, so because there is a tremendous amount of Aquarius energy this year, for that is your opposite sign as a Leo, I definitely see Leos being given a lot of opportunity this year, but it's like you got to work for it. Like there's going to be some powerful propositions possibly, or maybe just an offering for you to be a little bit more visible. But it's also going to require you to really do some kind of like work of transferring your creative energy and your ego energy into being received by the collective in a clearer way. So that's what I have for Leo. One more question, or was that it? Oh, Ahmed, are you raising your hand? Hello, I think you're muted.
Hi there. So I had a question, something that you said about how everybody has a different cultural astrology, different sign from different cultures. Do you, like, for those who are mixed race, they have roots at both sides. Is it easy nowadays for one to access, say, if I have two different roots and I want to look into different astrologies and the stories for it, where can one go to learn about such things? And what do you think about, how can we educate to learn others' different astrology, not just the Western astrology?
Totally. Well, I do know like there's a lot of information on the Mayan astrology and some more Central American indigenous based astrology systems there. Of course, the Chinese have their astrology system. I'm not familiar, with everyone's, but I think because astrology is so linked with mythology, we see so much crossover where it's just like, oh, like, this like Hathor is just like Aphrodite, or I think there's a lot of beautiful ways of seeing how cross-culturally, like I was saying, there was like sort of a collective consciousness of these archetypes appearing in different ways. So I think, if somebody is multicultural, multiracial, ethnic, incorporating multiple be really cool. And I mean, part of why I wanted to teach today about the history is because the history of the astrology that is considered Western is not Western at all, it's absolutely not, but it became so. And I mean, what are the missing links that I don't understand as a Westernized person from your culture or my culture, that they were perceiving and understanding? I'm sure there's a lot of things that I don't see, but I also trust my memory, my like ancestral memory. And I think for anybody who, wants to get into this, and if you are, not of the lineages that I was talking about today, and you want to learn, just trust that your DNA can remember. And that's really powerful. So stand under the moon, get that intuition, trust, download, and, you know, find books, find teachers. The internet is amazing. You know, the internet has, you know, it has its faults, but also has a lot of information. So thank you for your question.
Looks like we have one last one. Will this be a good year for Cancers?
For Cancer, I mean, Cancer just went through a lot, like the last 2 years. I think there was a lot because of all the Capricorn. So I do feel like the heat is off of Cancer a little bit. And yeah, it could be a good year for Cancers. I don't, you know, I don't have the chart in front of me right now to really tell you. But in terms of aspects, there's nothing too serious. It could be a very spiritual year for the water signs because of Neptune. So yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you all for coming. Once again, just would like to thank Mirto first. I hope you all feel as nourished as I feel right now. I'd also like to once again encourage you all to visit NOMA and catch this exhibition. It's called Mending the Sky. It features 11 different artists, local, national, and global artists who are exploring how we respond to disaster, responding to this moment. So it's a beautiful exhibition curated by my colleague, Katie Fole. Really encourage you all to check it out. NOMA is open Thursdays through Sunday now, 10 to 6 p.m. So yeah, and I also encourage you all to follow Instagram, NOMA's Instagram, to keep up with programs like this that we're doing. So yeah, I want to thank Mirto again, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much. And feel free to, I'm gonna leave my email and Instagram in the chat, or I don't know if that information was somewhere, but if people want my resources that you know, my sources, or just have any questions, please feel free to reach out. And you know, I'm always open to have conversations. So thank you all so much, and have a beautiful evening. Happy Aphrodite Day, Shabbat Shalom, whatever you're celebrating tonight, this weekend. Many blessings. And yeah, thank you.